So today we're going to be looking at the bad guys once again, and specifically looking at the cinematography. Now, before we dive into the cinematography, one thing I do want to do is just play the clip first, so you guys get an idea of what we're looking at, and then I'm going to explain what we're going to be looking for, and then we'll play it again with that knowledge. So, for this first playthrough, just enjoy the clip, and we're going to kind of just take it all in. So let me refresh here just to make sure it's going to load properly. And let's stop the music here. Okay. And hit play. Let me know if the volume's too low or too quiet there.
They say that art reveals more about the viewer than the artist. Mr.
Poodleton. Oliver Poodleton.
Okay.
It's about time someone stood up
I
to
love
those
the acting in this.
diabolical bad guys. Though I've got to say, no one succeeded.
The little head turn.
I don't think
So
it'll be
good.
that hard.
I have a feeling it'll be harder than you think. I'd say they're one epic job away from cementing their legacy.
The laughter is
Mr.
so well
Poodleton,
done too.
You're funny.
I am?
The contrast between the two.
Cementing his life in prison. Did you see their last job? Unsecured exits, crude disguises, compulsive showboating. I mean, it was a mess. All the classic signs of a crew in decline. Next, they're gonna make it personal. That's when you know they're toast.
So good. So it's a simple shot. It's just a two shot, which for anyone who doesn't know, basically means there's two characters in a shot. And it switches back and forth between the two of them. But there's this nice composition to it. Everything feels nice and clear. Everything is fun to look at, even for something as simple as this. They're not doing any big actions. They're really just walking. Not walking. They're not walking. They're just standing in place. And the most they do is kind of lean towards each other. This is beautiful to me because in animation, we don't have to have the characters moving all the time. We don't have to have them doing these big complex actions. Like if you watch the mayor right here through this shot, she just kind of sits there and reacts. Some eye darts and then she laughs. But at no point is she doing big motions. There's the laugh, there's the push. And that's really about it in terms of big actions. And yet it's dynamic, it's interesting. And the way they put the characters in the scene makes it stand out and makes it fun to look at. So I will talk about some animation topics in here as well, just because why not? But first off, how are they making the composition work so well? Well, the big thing that they're using is the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is a basic compositional framing device that you can use to make things stand out and to place your characters on screen in a way that is interesting and dynamic and that they feel like that the focus is in a proper place. And that's very key, especially for us as animators. One of our jobs, and one of the biggest jobs that we do, is that we direct the audience's eye. We have to be able to show the audience where they should be looking at any one time, because if they miss something, they're going to be lost. So we need to make sure that the audience never loses track of the important things. So the rule of thirds, what is that? Well, basically, you take your shot and you split it into thirds. So you just draw these lines over top of your shot, and you use this as a guide. Now, for anyone who hasn't heard of the rule of thirds, I'll give a basic explanation of it. Essentially, when you cut your shot into thirds like this, the areas where the lines meet, right here, are the areas that, as humans, our eyes tend to fall towards the most. And these are areas that really bring attention to specific things. So if you line something up, let's say a character's head right here, that is going to make it very easy to focus on that character versus having them in other places. Very nice. The lines themselves are also secondary interest points. So by keeping things to these lines, for example, let's say you have a character standing on screen and maybe you're going to position them over here. By keeping their eyes close to this line, it helps to keep our eyes focused on them. It's a secondary focus area. So this is like number 1 in terms of our focus. The lines themselves would be number 2 in terms of how well we focus on things. After that, we can then use the grid as a way of positioning things and framing things up in visual interest by actually thinking of the grids themselves. So instead of looking at the lines, we look at the actual segments. So for example, if I've got a 2-character shot, I could have one character kind of filling up this side of the screen here, filling these 3 grids, and the other character filling up the other one over here. And this creates a nice balanced feel to the shot. And we don't have to do it all in this way. There's all sorts of combinations. I should put a little caveat here. When you're thinking of composition, there's all of these little rules and all of these things that you can do, but none of them are hard and fast. You have to do it. You have to put your character right on this point here or else everything's going to fail. No, not at all. The important thing is that it just gives us a structure that we can use to build interesting scenes in different ways. You can think of it like Lego blocks, building blocks. There's not one way to put them together, but by using these specific pieces, we can make something that's visually interesting versus just a mess of placing things wherever and hoping for the best. So we can do all sorts of combinations here. So that's the rule of thirds. Now, there's a second rule that I like to use as well. You don't hear people talk about it too much, at least when you're not talking to like cinematographers. A lot of people just go, rule of thirds, done. I like to also include the center frame rule, which is you cut your frame down the center here. And the reason I like this is because it has another element of focus that is very important, which is the very center of frame. The very center of frame is the area that you will make sure that someone doesn't miss something. If there needs to be some sort of magic trick, if there needs to be some sort of close-up on someone taking something or someone leaving something behind, or if you're doing really fast action sequences where you're cutting from one shot to another, to another, to another, and you're supposed to follow it all, the center frame rule is going to be the area that people will not miss something. If you have things happen within here, people are going to see it. The other element that I love about the center frame rule, or the center frame composition, is that you can mix it in with the rule of thirds. So before I do that, let me explain a general concept about screen composition and character dynamics. Character dynamics are very important in animation. Character dynamics are what make one character feel more powerful than the other, more dangerous than another, more in control than another, versus another character who might be out of control or weaker or smaller or frailer, scared. The way you position them on screen is very important, and the relationship between two characters is especially important. So let's kind of stick with a 2-character shot here. One of the first elements of composition that you can use in making sure that characters have power dynamics between the two is height. If one character is bigger than another, staying up here, versus another that's standing over here, this character is going to feel much more powerful because they're huge in comparison. This is why a lot of villain characters, Darth Vader, just any big bad villain, there's a reason why they're called the big bad villain, because they're big. They stand up and they tower over a normal person. It makes them feel dangerous. And Wookie, thank you so much for the reminder. And also thank you so much for the sub. Thank you. Man, thank you so much. 14 months. Jeez. How's it been so long? And again, thanks for the reminder. So, we have the height that can really determine how a character feels in comparison to another. And this is also where you can use screen angle or camera angle to help tell this. So for example, if you want a character, we'll just do a one character shot here, to feel really big and menacing, have a low camera angle. So a low camera angle means that we're going to be looking up towards the character and we see the sky or the ceiling above them. This makes them stand tall and imposing. If you look at shots of, again, big bad villains, a lot of times the camera is low in comparison to them. This is very different versus someone that we want to feel very meek and small, is we would have the camera looking down on them. So we would actually see the floor here as they are kind of looking up right there. So by having the camera up above the character looking down on them, we make them feel small. So between these two things, the height can really show the power dynamic between these characters. And Life of Ty, hello, welcome to the stream. Will there be a time for a critique of my animation? Probably tomorrow will be better. It really depends on how long this demo goes for. If I have time at the end, I'd be happy to take a look at people's work. I do have a long work day, so I'm not sure how long this stream will go on for. I've got about 12 or 14 hours of work to do today, tomorrow, and Sunday, so I can't go too long for today's stream. And Bacon, hello! But definitely tomorrow I'm going to be keeping a specific time for feedback. Okay, so with the height of our characters, we show a lot of power dynamics in there. But that is not the exclusive way that we can show a power dynamic. The other one is screen space. How much of the character is on screen and how much of the space they are taking up. And this is where the center rule comes in. Generally, a character will inhabit one side of the screen or another, generally. So you will have, for example, a character over here on screen right of the screen. And the further they are away from center, the smaller and weaker they will appear. Even though the height is staying the same, by moving them over to the side, they feel like they're being pressed out. And especially if we add in another character right here, you really feel like this one is kind of trying to hide, or like they're being pressed away. They feel weaker, they have less power. But as they go towards the center of the screen, they start becoming more powerful. They are in control of the screen. And if they are in the center, then they have full control of the scene. From there, if they start to encroach onto the other side, this really makes them start to feel powerful because they are pushing into someone's space. And this is where you start thinking of screen space. Typically, when you have two characters on screen, you will have one character in screen right space, right here. The other one in screen left space, right there. And the way they interact will tell you a story. So, for example, if the one on screen right here starts to encroach over, we feel like they are trying to take over the situation. They are more in control versus the other character who might be further away, like that. If this one here crosses over, this shows that they are encroaching. It's almost invading that person's personal bubble. And it creates this more kind of exaggerated power dynamic. If the characters are both far away from each other, it creates this feeling of distance. Neither of them are taking power. They're equal in their stance, but there's not this closeness. There's not this kind of personal connection between the two. If they were to be positioned closer towards the center, now we get a similar feeling. They're both kind of equal on the scene here. One is not more powerful than the other, but there's a closeness to them. Or depending on how you frame up their poses, it could be a conflict where they're kind of butting heads. And this is something that's very important in our storytelling, because throughout a shot, throughout a film especially, you can use that to help tell the story of how these characters are becoming closer. If you watch Toy Story and watch the way they position Buzz and Woody on screen, at the beginning of the film, they are almost always positioned flat against each other and far away, unless they are fighting, in which case they will be butting heads. But they will be kind of like this throughout the film. Very far away, lots of space between them. As you get closer to the end of the film, they will tend to frame up the shots with more of a 3/4 angle. And I'm not saying they're doing this all the time, but just kind of in general. You will see more of a 3/4 shot. So one character is going to be kind of looking over here, and the other is going to be over here. And they're going to be much closer to each other on screen. So it creates this feeling of connection between the two. They are seeing each other more eye to eye instead of from across a room. And this helps to tell the story of connection between characters. So with that center framing rule, you have a lot of control over where a character's power dynamic is and how they are working together with another character. And this is why I like to mix it with the rule of thirds. So whenever I'm doing composition, this is kind of the view that I'm picturing. If you want, you can create your own guides like this, or turn on guides in Maya to create these compositions very precisely. But essentially, I'm just kind of picturing this kind of grid as I am thinking of my compositions. So if I want things to be well in focus, I aim for, and that's the wrong brush there, I aim for these points here or the center point. These are going to be the most important areas that if I need something that, or I need the audience to see something specific, I'm going to try to line them up there. If I need a character positioned on screen in a nice appealing way, typically like for a medium shot or something like that, I will try to have their eye line kind of hit above or below this line right here. Beep, beep, right there. So above or below that line, or on the line, it depends, as long as it's near there. Yeah. Simple little drawings. So by having the eye line kind of stick around that line, it gives a nice framing device. Now that's not always the case. It depends on how close to camera you are, but for most acting shots, this is a good generalization that you can use. If I am thinking of cutting back and forth between characters, I'm thinking of that center line and making sure that I'm respecting the screen left, screen right space of each character. As I want characters to become more powerful or take control of a scene, for example, maybe this character here, I will move them closer to that center line. And I'm trying to apply all of these elements to help make the shots more dynamic. This doesn't just help with characters, it also helps with the horizon line. So the horizon line is where the horizon sits on the scene. If you were just to extend to infinity, where that edge of the earth is. And typically what you want is to aim for around the center line or one of the thirds. This will give you a nice compositional focus most of the time, unless you're going for an extreme high or an extreme low angle. But these are good points to kind of focus your horizons on. Let's see, trying to think of any other little things on here. So yeah, that's basically the main concepts of the thirds and the center line. Now, there's a lot of ways you can use these concepts. Like I said, there's the basic premise of it, but the way you combine everything together and the way you put them together in different ways is just gives you an infinite source of possibilities. And this is where studying films comes in very handy, because by studying it, you can see how other people will utilize these rules and use them to push specific emotions. The other thing to keep in mind is that there are so many different types of emotion. Sure, you've got the 5 basics: anger, sadness, happiness, I forget the others. But then you have like the smaller in-betweens: disgust, jealousy, happiness. You go happiness, but then you go giddiness versus excitement versus just like gentle happiness. There's so many variations on emotions, and we can use the compositions here to help sell those in different degrees. So let's just look at some quick examples here of the rule of thirds. So this is mostly in photography, but you see the same thing in cinematography. So right here, we get this picture, and you can see the important subject is the both of them kissing on that third, and center frame so that they are the focus. Right here, characters standing on the third, and you can see that the shoulders and head are lining up closer to that center point, making that a little easier to focus on. The horizon line is falling pretty much close to the center here. Here they're using the center focus. So if you imagine that center focus right there, characters are more towards the center, and horizon line right on that lower third. This is a low angle. We're seeing a lot of the sky, and it helps to make this grand feeling. In this case, the characters are not really the focus. Yes, they should be standing out and we should see them, but the focus is how big the environment is around them. So by keeping them lower than that upper third, it helps to make everything else bigger. If they were framed up closer and kind of up on the upper third, it'll make them feel more imposing amongst this desert landscape. Here it's making them feel small amongst it. So once again, right on that third, horizon line on the upper third this time. Here we've got an extreme up angle, so the horizon line is off screen. But once again, third mark right there on the dog's head, and they are focusing the dog mostly on the far right segments here, which helps to emphasize the dog looking out into the horizon and into the environment. If the dog was in the center, we would have less of that directionality in there. It would feel less like, let me put it kind of, if this was a story, right now it kind of feels like this dog is looking out into the horizon, into the vast unknown, and where will the journey take them? If they were center focused, it might make it feel more like they're searching for something, because they're in the center. They could look left, they could look right. Who knows where they're going to go? They're searching for something. So by thinking of that framing, we can tell a little bit more of a story. For example, here, this character in the center frame, they are the 100% focus on here amongst these very weird woods. But they kind of there's not a specific directionality. She's looking screen right, but overall our focus is right in that center because everything is symmetrical. Compared to this, where it feels like she is looking at something. She's on that third line. The eye line is right above that upper third. And it gives that feeling of her looking towards something. Maybe another person, maybe an object, maybe something happening over there. But it makes us curious of what is she looking at? What is over there that she is taking a look at? So, rule of thirds, there is a lot of different elements in there. The big thing though is do not be tied down to it and think that you have to hit these thirds exactly. If you look at these, very rarely do things hit right on those dots. So for example here, the eye of the dog is not right in that center of this point right here. Slightly off. If we look at this, character is slightly off from that line, not perfectly on it. There will be times where you do want to have that point hit exactly, but if you do all the time, it starts to feel very mechanical because you're hitting these 4 specific points all the time, just one after the other, after the other, after the other. Instead, it's nice to have that natural offset because, well, in life, things move. If I set up my camera here and I got that nice composition, as I move, it's gonna change. So we can help to tell a different story through that. So those are the basics of the rule of thirds and the center line. Now just to kind of showcase here on screen, let me go through here. If we add a rule of thirds here, you can see there's the rule of thirds. My eye falls right about that center line. And really this just depends on whether I'm sitting up straight or if I'm slouching. And you can see it falls above or below that line. Sometimes right on the line right there. I typically like to sit on screen kind of towards the third line here. The reason for that is compositionally, it makes it feel like there's a little bit more of a conversation. That's what I like about my streams and my Q&As, the classes I teach, is I don't want it to just be, look at me, I'm the focus. To me, this is a conversation. This is me having a chat with a bunch of people who love animation and cartoons. And yes, it is a one-sided chat, but it is a conversation. So by framing myself in this way, it helps to emphasize that subconsciously. Versus if I was to sit here in the center of a frame and just looking straight in, now it tends to create the feeling of I am the focus and I am the one who should be listened to. Like, this is not a conversation now. This is me telling something that you have to listen to. And that's not a bad thing. You see a lot of YouTubers, Twitch streamers, whatnot, use this because they are the show. They are the person that you're watching on screen and you're listening to their stories. It just gives a different impression. That's it. There's nothing wrong with it. For me, I prefer this framing because it makes it feel like there's more room for others to speak versus me taking up the screen. Just a different storytelling technique, and we can use this just in our cameras, our webcams. Now, if I was to go over here on this third, suddenly this feels a little awkward. It feels like as I'm talking, if you imagine someone else over here as I'm talking to them, it feels like I'm pushing into their space. It feels uncomfortable. It doesn't feel like the framing works too well. It makes it feel like my nose is going to hit the edge of the screen as well. So this is something that we would very rarely do. But if we did want a character to be leaning in and like really like antagonistic, this could work really well where they start here and then over here and they're talking to this person and we really feel them getting into that person's face. So the rule of thirds can work very well and for all sorts of situations, even a webcam. And then if we add that center frame right here, you can see I tend to favor not crossing that center frame in my camera composition, or at least like not crossing it all the way like this. I will tend to favor staying over on my side of the screen. So we can use those as a way of framing up our webcams, but more importantly, framing up our shots in interesting dynamic ways. So let's turn those off there. Now let me answer a few questions here. I saw a question here. What do you think of the Fibonacci ratio? And there was another one. Would you say that this is a simplified version of the golden ratio? Yes and no. So let me search for it here and share my desktop. So the golden ratio is another form of composition which shares certain elements, but is not quite exactly the same. So the golden ratio is essentially an idea of keeping larger spaces of open detail versus compressed detail. So if you look at this, it does kind of follow the rule of thirds. If you look at this line right here, that kind of falls on the third right there. This falls on a third right here. So there's certain elements that line up in there, but more specifically, it's framing things up in a way where, for example, you would have areas here where there's not much happening, very open space. And as you go through, you start compressing in the amount of detail you have in there. So for example, here, if you kind of look at this in that kind of lens, right in here, there's very just big open planes. You can see on the body, there's no like necklace, there's no fancy jewelry. The clothing is very simple. As we get closer and closer, we get more detail in the trees here. And then by the time we go to the face, there's shadow detail. There's all of this very intricate and fine detail in that area. Now, does that work all the time? No, but it is essentially how the golden ratio works. So for example, here, once again, big swatches of open detail. And as you go in closer, you're getting more compressed detail. And you can also line things up to those points as well. So that is more of the golden ratio. And you can see it here, like smaller detail there, larger detail here. It's also just a pleasing swoop when you can kind of have things follow that compositional element. It helps to make things more dynamic. Another element of it, so we can kind of see it with this image here, is if you look at this, all the detail that I was talking about suddenly doesn't line up anymore because the face is the most detailed and the golden ratio section is right here in the armpit area where there's no detail at all. What the heck? Why are they showing this here? That's because the golden ratio can be used in a lot of different ways to show connections. So they're using this more as the rule of thirds. So if you take this, you line the character up into this box, you'll notice that the feet hit the edge of the box right here. You create your golden ratio, and if you go from corner to corner, the side of the body falls right there where that line meets. As you go, here's the next line of the golden ratio. That is right where the other side of the body is. The line in the middle here, right where the belly button is. So they're using more of the proportional guides, not the spiral itself, but the straight lines that you get out of it. The armpit falls right on this line here to line things up and create proportions. So it's a separate element, but can be used in conjunction. So here you see the rule of thirds and golden ratio kind of coming in together. So big open areas of no detail, just the sky and the ocean. As you get closer in here, You get more detail until you get to the head, which has all of the detail, the hat and the glasses and everything. The book falls right on this line right here. Eye line falls right there. So it's similar, but different. For animation, you can definitely use the golden ratio. I very rarely use it just because I feel like it's often more complex, especially for quick shots. For more of an artistic shot, definitely I will maybe open it up just to see if I can kind of get things to follow the golden ratio a little bit more. So I hope that answers your question there. And if anyone else has questions on that, definitely let me know. Let's see. Catching up with the chat here. And it is also called the Fibonacci spiral. So same name, or different name, same thing. Let's see. Incredibly off-topic question. If you were to animate burnout smoke out of simple geometry, how would you do it? Burnout smoke. So like tires spinning and you have smoke coming off of the car. I'm assuming that's what you're talking about. I would use either use an image plane with an image sequence on it of just smoke, which you could do either in Maya or in an editing program like After Effects or Premiere, just to add that in there. But essentially you just take an image sequence of smoke, ideally green screen of it, and just put it there, and there you go. You've got smoke. If I don't have that, then I would try to use an emitter in Maya to emit particles, and specifically smoke particles or cloud particles, to create some sort of quick smoke. You could do it with simple geometry and just have like animate polygons moving. But the problem with that is to put all of that detail into it, you might as well just use an emitter. It'll be faster in the long run and less of a headache on you to try to animate all these separate parts to create proper smoke. So yeah, those are probably the two ways I would approach first, unless I'm looking for a very specific feel to it. You could even just use the grease pencil, honestly, depending on how good your 2D animation skills are. So, if you have questions on that or want a demo on that, definitely let me know. At some point, I could try to aim for that. Now, in 2-character dialogue shots, I've seen people also are playing around with focal length of camera. Generally, they prefer higher values like 80. Yes. So, I've talked about this on other streams, and I'm going to be talking about this in future streams as well. But we can kind of cover it quickly here. Also, A to the J, hello! I mentioned something super quick, and he's got the link to it. I don't know how. It's magic. So let me open up an image here. So focal length is extremely important in... Let's see, what program can I use to open this in? I haven't installed all the programs on my system yet, so I don't... Keyframe Pro will open it? I don't think so. No. Let's see. I think I can open it up in Sync Sketch. Okay. So, as I'm doing this, the focal length on a camera is very important. Focal length is the zoom of the camera and the proper term of zoom. A lot of people tend to think of zoom as just moving in or out. Just zoom in. Aha, zoom out. Yeah. No. That is typically called a truck or a dolly. That everyone calls it different terms. It essentially means that you're moving the camera forward or back physically. A zoom is changing the focal length, actually changing the camera lens so that it gets longer or shorter. And when you do that, you are changing the way the lens sees the world. A shorter lens is going to make things feel fish-eyed or have extreme distortion. So if I do something like this, you can see one hand is much bigger than the other. further away, so there's this bigger distortion. With a longer lens, even if I did that, the hands would appear about the same size, especially with like a 100 to 200 millimeter lens. So depending on the lens length, we can really drastically change the feel of a shot. So I'm just trying to upload a clip here so we can take a look at it. Okay, so let me bring this onto my other screen and we're going to take a look. So this is a wonderful demonstration of this, where here we have an actor or a character, and A to the J with the link right away. If you want more on this, definitely check out that link. But here we have a character who has been shot at a 20 millimeter lens. And you can see that it creates this very fisheye lens. He's got this big nose, very narrow shoulders. It kind of looks like Linguini from Pixar, or any of those geeky characters from Pixar films, with the narrow shoulders, big nose, very kind of tall head. Now, as we increase our focal length, notice what happens. As the lens length gets longer, everything starts to flatten out. Now, there's no big distortion on the nose compared to the shoulders. And it changes the look of the character immensely. Suddenly, this character doesn't look like a meek little dork with a big nose, narrow shoulders. This character looks really strong. Wide shoulders, thick neck. His head compared to his neck is about the same size here. Like, look at that. It's all just straight. Compared to here, where you have this very big offset between the size of his head versus the size of his neck, and then size of the shoulders. Even the nose, if we look at the proportions here, that nose is essentially a third of the size of his head here. 1, 2, 3. Whereas here, it's still the same, but everything kind of feels like it's being stretched. So it's not like making huge changes, but it is that slight distortion that makes a huge difference. It's mostly that distance here. So because the nose to the side of the face is about the same, we don't really see much of a distortion here. But if you look at, for example, his forehead, look at how this feels very flat right here versus this where it feels very round. Because we're seeing that depth of the head here. So that is the importance of lens length. And knowing what lens length to use for a shot is very important, because you can drastically change how a character feels. If you want to have a character, a big bad villain, be super imposing and have this big close-up on them, and you pick something like a 20 millimeter lens, they might look a little dorky. They're going to have a big nose, very narrow shoulders. But if you pick a longer lens, maybe like somewhere around 100, that's going to make them feel more imposing. Now, if you want the opposite effect, maybe you want a character reaching for the screen and you want the hand to really stand out compared to the rest. If you take a long lens, you're going to get something that looks like this. It's going to reach, and the hand is going to be about the same size compared to the head as normal, as if I was doing this. If I take a shorter lens, suddenly you can get something like this, where the hand is like twice the size of the head, and you can create that more dynamic feel to it. Now, for shots of people, typically you're going to aim for around 40 to 70, 80 range, or 35 to 40, 70. And this is the range of the human eye typically, so it creates a more natural look. Our eyes are varied, they actually change lens length, but normally sit around 40, 44 millimeter ish. They go down to 35, they go up quite a ways too, Depends on the distance of the object and each individual eye. But the 35 to 70 range here and 85 range is kind of the more natural range and avoids the over distortion or the over flattening of the face. So usually for portraits, you will see people use a 50 millimeter lens. So something like this. Most people tend to look best at a 50 millimeter, especially for a portrait style photo. But again, this also depends on the person. If a person is naturally very thickly built, a longer lens will make them look even thicker. So you might choose a shorter lens. A person who's very thin might look more appealing, just less sickly if you use a longer lens, because if you use a short lens, it's going to take that thinness and really make them thin. So you have to adjust your camera lens length based on the character, based on the situation, based on the feeling you want in your shot. But that's a whole other element of cinematography, but a very important one. So I hope that helps. I hope that makes sense. Now, let's see. Trying to think if there's anything else I want to talk about here before we move on to this again. So we've talked about the rule of thirds. We've talked about how things line up. And when we first watched this, for most people, when they're watching a film, you're not really thinking of the rule of thirds. You're just enjoying the film. You're not thinking about how things sit on frame. Now, if we take this here, and let's actually add that rule of thirds in here. So I'm going to bring in the rule of thirds and the center framing. And if we watch this now, let me actually make sure I can see that properly there. If we watch this now, you'll notice that the characters line up in very specific ways. So right here with the first shot, we have both of these characters on screen. And if we look at the center frame, she is on screen left, he is on screen right. Even though he is kind of cutting over the line, the majority of him is over here. And the reason why this works it doesn't make him feel like he's imposing or pushing into her space is that they're both looking screen right. So it makes them feel like they're close, not like super familiar, like he's not standing right next to her, but they are still both focused on the same thing. So we've got this nice composition right here. And you can see she falls right into this far left third, and he kind of fits more into the center. And then you've got that open space right there. So it kind of gives a nice open direction that they can be looking in. So with this, and hey, Vraukus, hello! Versus the current events. What current events are happening right now? I'm so out of the loop of things. All I know is that there's apparently a storm warning for me. There's a huge thunderstorm last night. I didn't think I was going to be able to do the stream. It was a huge thunderstorm. And apparently it's supposed to hit again today. So that's all I know. I've been in my bubble. So if we take a look at this here, let's play through. And I'll just pause it every once in a while. So we've got characters on their thirds. Now, as they reposition here, look how they line up. She changes and her head falls right on that third, right there. As he turns around, he falls a little bit more towards here. He's opened up that space there. So he's not, oh no. Oh, dang it. Why are, okay, that if I go into that whole topic there, we're going to be here for a full 5 hours talking about rights and everything. That sucks. That's horrible. Oh, okay. Happy things. Calm down. So, world events. Why can't they be positive world events? Gosh dang it, world. Just get it right once. Why can't it be puppies? There are so many puppies in the world. Everyone gets a puppy. Uh, and yes, thunderstorms. So many thunderstorms here. This year has been just thunderstorms galore. But back to Happy Topics. The Bad Guys, one of my favorite films. So as they turn, what we get here is him pulling away slightly, so it opens up space for him to then move in. And now you can see he cuts into her space a little bit. He's being a little too forward. And that causes her to back away. But they're using that center frame as a guide for that. He's not just kind of going forward and stopping here. He's actually crossing into her space, past that center frame. Not only that, as he raises the diamond up here, look where it lands. Right near the center frame. This is something important to the shot. And even though we as the audience are focused here, and make sure I draw that, there you go. Here, we're focused on their interaction. By bringing the hand up towards that center, it lets our eyes kind of, oh, what's this? It's interesting. And essentially they're creating a visual triangle. We've got this, then we've got that to the diamond, and make sure my lines are straight there. There's this visual triangle of focus that we want the audience to stay in. So we've got this cut here. Now it cuts back. You can see once again, he is pushing into her space. His overall position is on this third line. You can see right there, most of his body is back here, but it's leaning forward, cutting into her space, and it causes her to lean back away from him. And you can see how she is favoring more of that far left third versus the center. She's kind of uncomfortable. The diamond right near that other third. And if we look at the eye line, right above the upper third there. Lots of different things to look at, but all of these are ways that we can use to frame things up. And the animators don't have control over the camera. Depends on the studio. For larger studios, not so much. Smaller studios, you might actually be in charge of some camera stuff. In general, this is handled by the storyboard previs department, who will set up the cameras and kind of get the main compositions. But then as animators, we have to position the characters to fit that camera. So the animator is the one in charge of, for example, making sure the wolf character here goes far enough or back enough to hit these marks. And also keep in mind, like I was saying before, these marks and these thirds and whatnot, they're not super precise. You have to hit these exactly. They are guidelines because things move. But we can use these as a way of telling a story visually with our composition. So as the shot comes closer here, you can see her pull away even more away from him as he leans in. And then this shot is just wonderful. Look what happens with the diamond. It goes right into the center of the frame so that we focus exactly on that as he pulls it down. This is a wonderful use of center framing. They want to make sure that you see this. If this doesn't happen, if we as the audience miss this, there's a lot of story elements later on that won't quite make sense. We won't understand what is the significance of this diamond, of this ring. But by focusing right here, we as the audience do not miss it. We're not focused over here. We're focused entirely on that diamond because everything else is kind of far out from that. Pulls away. Great motion on that. Look at that beautiful hand motion. Overlap on the hand as he lets go. Now, once we get here, we go back to the thirds. She's on a third, he's on a third. And from there, he pulls away a little bit and we start going back to the typical screen right, screen left on the thirds. So if we play through this here. Now he's got the diamond. He's not as interested anymore as at being really close to her. And you can see he's kind of fallen back until he gets confident and he leans in. And again, using that center line, he doesn't cut into it now. Now they're having a conversation. And you can see he doesn't cut into it. Whereas she now, when she starts gaining the upper hand in the conversation, she has these things to say, she will lean in and once again reach that center line. So whoever is kind of taking control of the conversation will tend to lean in a little bit. And taking control of a conversation, it doesn't mean that they are like the leader and everything they say is the truth, but they're maybe more confident in the conversation. They're having fun being in the conversation versus, no, I'm not comfortable with this anymore, and they're further to the side. By using these guides, they can show this back and forth a little bit more clearly. Right here, you can see that a little bit of closeness. They're starting to bond a little bit over this thing, and both of them are coming into the center frame a little bit more before pulling away. And then as she laughs here, watch what happens with him. He starts to back away right here. He goes from leaning in, his nose right on that line, and then he backs away and he's kind of taking a step back, whereas she goes from like way back here to a little bit more forward. I love this. I love her acting. But you can see how they're keeping them on that third and using that center line as this kind of guide to keep the characters on their screens, but showing that back and forth. Once again here, look at his eyes right there. There's the third, just slightly above the line. Nice focus right in there. And then we've got that line of action leading us in. Same with her line here. It kind of leans in this way. So it brings our eyes in towards each other right there. As he comes back, let's see. We get that, and you can see she's taking the lead now. She's getting closer to the center. He's pulling away. He's now mostly in this outer third. I love her motions there. So we can see that composition and how the characters balance each other out there. And it's not huge. It's not like they are using this to like hit specific points. And again, you have to hit exactly right there and there and there. But it's just kind of this generalization of that center and how they push in and out from there to help keep things alive. If you just have a character acting and they're just always on that third and they'll move and do stuff, but you're trying to stay on that third the whole time, it gets boring really quick. But by having them lean in, pull away, lean back in afterwards, and use that to tell a story, that adds so much more. So let's actually just listen to this once again, but with the guides turned on, and see how it helps to lead our eyes in the correct places. So let me unmute this here. Let me mute the music and let's hit play.
They say that art reveals more about the viewer than the artist. Mr.
Poodleton. Oliver Poodleton.
Okay.
It's about time someone stood up to those
I love this show.
diabolical bad guys. Though I've got to say, no one's succeeded yet.
I don't think it'll be that hard.
I have a feeling it'll be harder than you think. I'd say they're one epic job away from cementing their legacy.
Mr. Poodleton, you're funny.
I am?
The only legacy there.
You can really see how they are using that upper third line to keep the character's eyes in focus and not bouncing around up and
It
down.
was a mess. All the classic signs of a crew in decline. Next, they're gonna make it personal. That's when you know they're toast.
So they are using a lot of different elements in here to make sure that the the character's focus is, or I should say the audience's focus is contained. So let's see, when they both look to the right, he is on the left of the third line. Yeah. So like I was talking about here, here at the beginning, he is on the left because they're both looking in the same direction, but he is still screen right. So if we look at that center line, he's still screen right. So it still maintains their relationship, screen left versus screen right. But by keeping him here versus, let's say, having him over here, if he was over here kind of looking across, he would just be like nose pressed right against the edge of the screen. It wouldn't be super appealing, and it would make it feel like they're not really looking at something. By keeping them kind of closer together, looking at something, it kind of makes it creates this sense of camaraderie, I guess you could say. They are both looking at the same thing and appreciating the same thing, versus just people in a crowd looking in a general direction. If they were actual teammates, or if they were friends, if they knew each other, then compositionally you could have Wolf over here, and this would make them feel closer and looking at the same thing. And then afterwards, he would take a step into screen right, and then you'd have that screen left, screen right space again. Same thing as he does here.
They say that art reveals more about the viewer than the artist.
Where he takes as he kind of turns, he goes towards that
Oliver Poodle.
screen right line there. Or I should say, yeah, that third line. So you can use these, again, as guidelines. The key here is do not try to hit them specifically. If you are trying to hit the line all the time, her eyes always have to hit here, his eyes here. The character has to hit on that third. You're going to get shots that feel dead because it's going to feel too specific. A master of this, who does do it well, is Wes Anderson. Wes Anderson is a master of framing things up in these ways that normally would make things feel kind of boring, but he does it in such a way that it makes it dynamic and interesting, kind of weird. It definitely doesn't feel natural. If you look at his films, there's always this kind of oddity to it. And a lot of it comes from his composition, how he's always lining things up on a third or center frame perfectly and symmetrically. For most shots, that starts to feel too boring, I guess you could say. So we try to vary it up, but within a range. So if you look at her, for the most part, her eye range is between the third and the center line right here. His eye range kind of goes from above the line to just slightly below the line. So if we go through this right here, you can see it goes from above to right on the line. Hers right here above the line, but that's because they are focusing on the diamond. If her eye was over here, it creates too many areas of focus. So by keeping her eyes up here and his eyes up there, the third point of focus is down here. So we just keep that nice, simple line versus too many points. Once that diamond's out of the equation, now we have her eyes slightly below the line, his eyes slightly above the line. And they just kind of keep that consistency right through. So it just helps to give focus to certain things. Now, one thing that I also love about this, and this is not so much compositionally, but just in terms of animation, is how they really push the visual storytelling of the poses. I kind of pointed this out a little bit with the way they kind of lean in towards each other or away from each other. So his line of action is coming in through here. Her line is kind of being pushed back like that. So you can really see how she is reacting to him kind of leaning in. If this was a more romantic moment, for example, her line of action would probably be leaning in towards there. So it creates this connection between the two. Instead, we get this kind of repulsion. She's being pushed back as he's leaning forward. Same thing here. Line of action. They're really pushing that S shape, and it makes her feel less in control by having this S shape, this kind of like pull back versus his nice strong C shape. And it's almost, you can almost say it's closer to a straight in some ways. But then once he pulls away, let's kind of go into this shot here. Now she's interested in what he's saying. Now that line of action is kind of leaning in right there. So we're getting that kind of interest right there. They're using the lines of action to really show how these characters relate to each other right there. Now they're really connecting. Now you can even see it here. Her line of action starts to come in right there. His line is doing this until she laughs. And as he steps away here, you can see his line of action is no longer leaning in quite as far compared to hers. So he's kind of pulling away slightly, not all the way. So we can use that line of action. Line of action isn't just making a pose dynamic, it's telling a story between two characters. And the more characters you have, the more this is important. Let's see, does the camera always also move to match the characters to thirds instead of moving randomly? Yes, in a way. The camera is moving to keep the characters in frame in an appealing way. So as the camera moves, for example, here, as he leans in, there's this extra camera move right here. You can see it right there. This is to help keep the characters in frame because he's pushing forward, she's going back. If the camera doesn't move, suddenly these characters are just going to be pushing towards the edge of the screen a little too much, and it makes it feel like the camera isn't connected. The camera is the audience. So if the characters move quite a bit on screen, we as the audience, if we were there in person, we would turn our heads to look at them. So here, the camera is looking at them. As they move, the camera turns to keep looking at them. So it's making us feel involved in the scene versus just a static camera that's not moving and they are moving in huge amounts across the screen. Now, that doesn't mean that you always have to move or match every single character move exactly with your cameras, just in certain situations. For example, like here, there's this slight camera move. You can see it in the background, but this is just a slow pan around. We're just kind of circling the characters slightly. It keeps the shot alive versus just having them frozen on screen and nothing is moving. But it's not moving to catch every single one of their small movements. It's just kind of a nice global adjustment. You can think of it like almost adding a shaky cam. It's just there to add movement. But then here, as she's talking, and then we switch back here, there is no camera move. Because even though the characters are doing big changes, it's not, how to put this? You can almost think of it like conversations. If I was having a conversation with someone, I could sit here and I could move around. And especially when you get really animated in a conversation, you can move around a lot. And it's like, wow, what a big thing that happened. And as you're talking to that person, if you are talking to them, you're not doing this for every single move that they do. You're just kind of focused on their global motion. You might make small eye darts, but you're just listening to them as they're talking really excitedly. You're not having to change all the time. But if I was to then stop talking and dive to the side because of some reason, more likely you would go, what? And follow along with what I'm doing. The camera is similar. In these situations here, we're having a conversation. We don't need to move the camera for every little thing that they do because we know that they're going to come back and keep talking to us. They're not running away. Whereas with something like this is an unexpected move. This, if we were kind of just an audience member standing to the side here and watching this interaction, we don't know that, oh, they're going to lean in and try to pull away. So that's a moment where it's like, oh, something happened. And you can add that little camera move right in there. That's one way of thinking about it. Camera moves and composition, there's so many variations and there's so many meanings behind it that you could have a camera move in a conversation if you want to tell a specific story about that conversation. So in most cases, you kind of keep it still because it adds too much motion. And let's see, when animating two characters in the same shot, do you recommend focusing blocking on the first character and then move to the second one, or work on both of them? I would work on both of them because, like we were showing here, a lot of the motions, even if they're not interacting, the composition of it needs to work together. So for example, here, both characters are leaning in and you see really how their eyes, that line of action leads right there. We get a nice connection between the two. And as you're posing these characters out, you need to be able to pose them as one pose. There's two characters, but it creates one pose that works together to create a composition between the two. If you just leave one character in a T pose, block the other one out, get all of that nice in place, then block out the second character, you might have to make some very big changes on the first character if the second character is too short, too tall. You can't quite pose them to match the eye line. So you want to kind of work with them together. Now, with that said, it's good to have a focus. Which one should you pose first? And in those cases, it's usually the character who is taking charge. So for example, if I was blocking this out, let's say this scene right here, I would probably block out Wolf first on one frame, then block the mayor in second, so that I have his motion leading the action. So it's not just you do one character, then you do a second character, but also not just both characters evenly across. Sometimes you will focus more on one than the other per frame. The other thing that you don't have to do is block each character on the same frame, always on the same time. This is kind of something I see a lot of students fall into, because when you first learn animation, let's say you have all your control curves on this rig here. You've got an elbow control right there. You've got your head control. You've got your body controls, all of that stuff. When you're taught to animate, you are taught to key everything on every frame. So you take all of your head controls, all your body controls, all of that, and you set a key and you pose it out. This is for the pose to pose method. And the reason this is you don't want to just have one random thing moving, like the elbow move, and then the head move, and then the body moves, and then the elbow moves again. It creates this disjointed, horrible mess that's going to be harder to animate later on. If you're using a layered animation, that's a whole other story. But we are taught to pose everything together. Now, when students start going into two character shots, they kind of take that mentality with them, where now this character has a whole set of controls on there. And okay, now I'm going to select everything, and on every single key that has motion, I'm going to keep both characters all together. No, you don't have to do that. You can key the characters separately. So if one character is holding, so for example, she hits this pose right here while he's still turning, I could have a key right around like here on her, and then another key right about like here, let's say. Just those two keys. Whereas with him, you would have a key probably like here on the head turn right there, a key right here, maybe another key or breakdown. I would maybe put another one where his hand's coming out of his pocket as his hand reaches up here, and then another one when his hands contact right there. So many more keys on him in that segment, keys, breakdowns, whereas her, she's just holding the pose. Now, when that's important to keep both characters together is when they are interacting like this. It's not 100% necessary depending on the situation, but typically it's good to then keep them together in some way. Otherwise, especially like if you have a character like, let's say arm in arm, they've got their arm over the other person, and you key the one character but not the other, you're just going to have this weird bouncing effect where character's in the arm and then not in the arm, then in the arm again, and then not in the arm. It's going to be very confusing. But if they're not connected in any way, you just key them separately when they need to move. So I hope that makes sense. And every shot is different. So there will be times where those rules will be broken. They are not 100% like you have to follow these at every single instance. It's just a generalization. Okay. So another thing I wanted to mention about this shot that I absolutely adore, and this is something that the whole film does wonderfully, is, and I just realized it's kind of quiet. Let me turn on some music. Here we go. Is that they shape things to camera. And this is a very important thing that we as animators need to focus on when we are working, is that we do not need to pose things out to be 100% perfect from every angle. If you're in video games, that's very different. You are going to be doing that much more often, posing it to work from multiple angles. But for a film, we typically try to pose things so they're most appealing from this camera angle. And you can really see this with the way they animate the ears on these characters, and as well as the mouth shapes. So, for example, with the ears, if you watch the way her ears pull back and move forward throughout this shot, you'll notice that instead of this ear kind of pulling back this way, which kind of pulls down that way, and then the other one doing this similar thing this way and kind of pulling down like that, instead they have one ear pulled down to the side and then the other one goes straight back. And it creates this nice directionality to the ears. They both go back together, and it helps to push that line of action through the whole pose. The same thing happens when she gets excited. So here you can see both ears kind of coming in together. That's a very nice, appealing pose. It creates this nice triangle shape to her head. But then when she starts to react here, let's see, where is it? Right there. The ears go back. Once again, really following that shape, working together. And here, yeah, that would make sense. Both ears go back together. But then as she turns her head, notice that as she's looking to the side here, they're pushing this ear much further to the side than this one. They're twisting it around so that it continues this nice silhouette of the head. As she turns, you can really see it here. The head is almost facing camera, and that ear is much more pointed this way, and then this one is like way over. They're shaping those ears to match the pose and the angle of the character. That is super important. Now, these ears, they are very big. They are very noticeable. Most shots that you're dealing with characters, you're not going to be dealing with those kinds of things very often, but you might be dealing with fingers. So as you're posing out a character and they are gesturing towards something, naturally you might get a pose where a character is looking this way and they're going to put their hands out and the fingers kind of point straight towards camera, something like this. That's not going to be super interesting. So depending on what you want the focus to be, if they're supposed to be like gesturing to themselves, you cheat the hand to be more like this so that we feel that line pointing back. If they're supposed to be gesturing out to something, you cheat the hand the other way so that we get that line moving out towards where they're pointing. Little things like that can help a lot. The elbow is another one where you can really use to your advantage. So if you've got an arm up here, you could push the elbow out to point towards something or kind of pull it in slightly to get a stronger line and use the hand to gesture a little bit more. Now, a lot of it depends on the situation, so there's no hard and fast rule to this, but essentially it just comes down to designing your poses for the camera. And that is very, very important. And you see this throughout this whole film. Like, once again, she turns her, where is it here? Yeah, right there. So here, they're really pushing those ears back this way. Once again, getting that nice line right through. And then as she raises her head, get that nice triangular shape. Once again, beautiful line right through there. And both ears following that line. Even this slight tilt here. It's really nice. They're designing it to camera. The area that we as animators for most films, regardless of if the characters have ears or not, whoever they are, the big thing that we will tend to really focus on is the face. The face is definitely an area where you want to shape things based on the angle of the head. And you will pop that change very quickly if you need to. And there's an area here. I'm trying to remember exactly where it is. I remember seeing it and thinking, oh, that's really cool. Yeah, so like right here, for example, if you look at his mouth shape, they're really emphasizing him talking out of this side of his mouth because that's the side we see. If I'm at a 3/4 angle like this and I move my mouth like this, you're not going to see much. So I move my mouth over to the side that the audience will see. Now this character has a big muzzle, so that's a little easier to do without kind of feeling odd. But now as the character turns their head, see how they create this transition. The mouth comes into the O shape. As it's doing that, they now bring the mouth over onto this side a lot more. Now again, big muzzle, so that's easier to cheat because we don't see any of the side of that mouth on there. But you can really see it right there. See how they're cheating that shape? Very big on that side. This side very narrow. It's not out here. It's compressed in so that then the nose stands out. On this next frame, they reverse it. Right there. Right there. You can see the pop as they're switching from one side to the other. And it's technically a pop. But it works because they are favoring the camera. And when we watch it at speed, all we see is these beautiful mouth shapes. So you want to be very conscious of what are you presenting to the camera and how can you make it as appealing as possible, because that's what the audience will see. They're not going to see anything else off screen or on this side of the face here. They're only seeing this side. So this is the most appealing side there. And if you move your perspective camera to just kind of take a look and you notice the face is all distorted and twisted from the front, but it looks good from the side, who cares? That's not super important. As long as it's not broken, well, even then, sometimes you will break the face just to make it look good from one camera angle. But that is a very, very important thing to just keep in mind and watch out for. That visual language from the camera's position. Let's see. Trying to think if there's any other things I want to talk about on this shot. There's a lot of animation things that we could talk about. Overlap on the ears, facial expressions, acting choices, lip sync. But I do want to kind of keep the topic on composition here a little bit. So if we have time, we might come back to this shot, because there are a lot of little things that I love, like her eye darts right here. You can really see her just paying attention to what he's saying. And look how still the body is. There's almost no motion, but there's just these nice little eye darts in there until she smiles. And as she smiles, we feel the eyes leading the action. Then everything comes in, this nice overlap and half blink in the eye as the mouth kind of eases into its final pose right there. And you really feel that connectivity. As the mouth is going up, you feel the cheek kind of being pressed up here as well. And then the nice inflation of the cheeks before it just pops out. That's really nice. But I'm getting distracted. We can talk about all that later. Let me take a sip of water. Thanks for Wookie for the reminder. Okay. So actually, before I do move on to the next shot, does anyone have any questions? It could be on this or anything else before we jump into the next one. Okay. So let me load this up, make sure it's all good. Doesn't look like there's any questions. So let's watch the next shot here. And once again, we're going to look at it without composition elements, and then we're going to look at it with the composition in here. So let me mute the music and hit play.
Unit 2 is the backstage
I
area
love
still
her.
secure. This is where all the training pays off.
Oh, pardon me. Terribly sorry.
Not a problem, sir. Keep your eyes open, boys. They could be anywhere, just waiting to humiliate us.
Very nice. I love that shot. I just love everything about this film. It's so good. Okay, so let's bring in our framing here and watch that once again. I'll just hit play. We'll watch the whole thing and then we'll look at the important elements that they've done here. So
Unit 2 is the backstage area still secure. Unit 2 roll clear.
you can see how she fits right in that center.
Oh, pardon
Until
me.
there, they're on their
Terribly
Not a
thirds.
problem, sir. Keep your eyes open, boys.
Now he's in the center.
Anywhere, just waiting to humiliate us.
And look at where the card lands right there.
Unit
So we've got a lot of different things, but once you have the grid on here, you can really see how they're using that to frame things up and keep things from going too close to the edge of the screen, too far, and keep things in focus. So right from the start here, let's turn on the music. We have the scene come in with this wipe. They're using the character's back here as the wipe right there. And we have the police officer, and she is taking the center frame. She is the main focus of this whole shot. And you can see everything is just right in that center right there within the thirds right through there. And you have Wolf just on the outer edge because we're not really supposed to be paying too much attention to him right there. The thing that makes him stand out, which is a whole other topic, is color theory. So we have darks on this side, dark shirt, dark hair, like shadow there, like look at everyone's clothing. It's dark, 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 dark. The sky is dark. On this side, dark clothing once again. What stands out? The very bright clothing right here. And even the highlights in the area, so bright light right there, bright right here, it brings all of our attention right there. That's a whole other category of composition and color theory. But as she's coming through here, she's nice right in the center. As she comes through, her eyes kind of fall towards the third line up until right here, where she has this nice stretch pose and her eyes are getting right up to the top of the screen. But essentially they're just framing her head up into that third, and you can actually see with the center line, it's right in there. Nice focus. I also just love the anticipation here. Look how low she anticipates there and the drag. It's so good. So she comes to a stop here, reaches over, ends up right on that third line, reaching over into the space that Wolf used to be in. And you can kind of see how they're using that center line once again to push the character out to the side before right back into the center frame. And look where everything important is happening. Right on the center. You've got the radio, you've got her finger, you've got everything kind of pointing in there. Creates this nice triangle right there. triangle of focus. And once again, it doesn't have to be like 100%. You see that finger drag down here and then go over to the side, but they're hitting these moments of very specific focus. So she's right in the center here. Everything important is happening right in here and close to the center right there. Then she stands up. Now our focus comes up over the line into this open area, which makes it easy for us to see Wolf come out. If all of our focus was still in here, everything looking right in there, and then he came out through here, there's a lot of noise happening here. There's the radio, there's her hand, there's the badge, there's the tie, there's so much visual stuff there. Here, we have her head and his head. That's it. So by bringing it up here, we can more easily see the focus of the character's shift. Now she gets hit right in here, and as she gets hit, she kind of gets pushed towards screen and then turns out, and when she stops, look where they land. His head is more or less on the third, and so is hers. And we get that nice hitting the thirds right there. The nice connection between the two. And they are below the thirds, so it creates, if he was up here, so if his eye line was up here looking down, it would make him feel more imposing, like he's kind of leaning over down on top of her. By bringing him below that third line, it makes him feel more sympathetic. The lower you go, the more unimposing you are. So for example, if you're trying to like call a kitten or a puppy and you don't want to scare them, you go down low and you make yourself smaller so it's less scary. That's essentially the same thought here. Is if he was standing up tall, it would feel like he's pushed her and then it's like, oh, sure, I'll help you. Whereas if he comes down below that line and more towards the center, it brings him down to her level where she has ended up after being hit. Makes him feel more genuine, even if he's faking it. Now we have him stay on the third here as he leaves screen, moving there. And you can see they're both positioned on the outer thirds now. The center has been left open. This shows that nice separation, and essentially it allows us to still focus on her, but we're starting to pull away. If she was in the center right here, all of our focus would be right there on her. But because she's kind of falling away, we are still focused on her, but just barely. She's getting smaller on screen, eye right on that center line there, before we come up here. And where do we end up? Right in the center here. And now he is framed up in the center, which is where she used to be, right here. So we've switched the focus from her to him. The other way we do this is two ways. One, having her turn away from camera. By having her turn away, we're not looking at her face anymore, so we're not going to be looking at her anymore. She also falls out of focus. So she's blurred right here, whereas he is falling into focus. This is a focus shift. Or a rack shift. And then not only that, we have this character walking in front of the camera, which essentially creates a wipe, a cut, that refreshes our eye and brings us right to Wolf here. Now, I just love this hand pose with the pinky up like that. That's so great. Now, as he shows the card, look at where the card lands. Center frame, right on that third. His eyes, right on that third. So this is showing us two very clear things. What he's looking at and this piece of information that we don't want to miss. And then we get a nice change of focus right there. And where does it land? Right in the center. Before he walks off, center frame. And look at where, when he shifts up the card, right near the center again. because we want to make sure that we as the audience see, look at that, it's right in the center. We want that to be the focus. There's something important here. They brought it up earlier, but it's still important. And his eyes stay along that third. And then when we cut over here at the end, look at the composition. You've got Spider just filling in that third on the side there. So it creates this nice clean composition that just everything leads our eye to focus on what's important. In this case, Wolf and him taking the card. So it's, how do I want to put this? It's nothing super complex to say. When it's always easier to say after the fact, look at all this stuff. Wow, isn't it neat? Isn't it amazing how they did all of these little things and see how easy it is? Yes, after the fact is very easy. But when you're planning this out, this takes time. This takes planning. The planning phase of your animation, this is where you would put most of this thought in. How do you want to create the composition? Where do you want your focus of the audience to be? How do you want the character to appear on screen, whether they appear small, large, in control or not? That is all very important. Even just this last frame here, we've got Spider who is taking up 3 squares here, and then Wolf, if you look at this point to this point, that's pretty much the height of him. He's just ever so slightly past that inner third right here. This makes him feel like he is still focused on, we can still see him, but he is not, how to put this? He is not there in person. We're looking at him on a screen small, because he is literally small on screen. If they had him framed up like this on the monitor, it would make it hard to look at anything else. It would feel weird to have Spider also there really big on screen, at least for this type of shot. So it is a very specific thing that they're doing here, and it works very well. And Johan, hello, it has been a long time. I did have long hair the last time. Now it's actually grown quite a bit. It was much shorter than this, like half this length, if not less than that. Finally cut it, finally donated it. So yay, it was finally long enough. And the Spider is awesome. I love Spider. All of the characters in here are so good. And Animated Paul, hey, thank you so much for the sub. I really appreciate that. 33 months. Oh, 33 months, that's almost 3 years. Jeez, thank you so much. Also, hello. Hope you're doing well. And then if you really want to show something, you would make the object more center. Yes. The more centered an object is, the more focus it will be. The more easy it is to keep your focus on that and make sure the audience doesn't miss it. Typically, you would also have these points as well, the thirds. So all of these points right here are the most important points to kind of frame if you want to have something not be missed. The most important is the center. That's going to be the area where if something falls in here, the audience is not going to miss that. After that, you have these points here, which we don't typically use as much, or you don't see it used as much in compositions, mostly because they have to be balanced. So for example, here, it works here because we have the eyes up here and then the card down here. So it's balanced. If you only had the card and then his face over here, these points would not be as clear. Our eyes would favor the thirds instead. So these ones right here, there, and there, you have to use with caution. This is the best, and then these are the secondary points, typically. So there's a lot of little rules that all apply and change from shot to shot. Now there was another question up here that I missed. I have a question. With the eyes, the movements need to be in 2 frames, or what do you think? because I see they are really faster. Eye motions typically happen in 1 or 2 frames. So eye darts are very, very fast. If you've got an eye position right here and the character is looking over here and you want them to dart the eye over the next frame, right here, you could have the eye all the way over here. So in 1 frame, boop, look over. If it's a big eye dart, you can sometimes put another frame, which is good. So 2 frame move. Very rarely will you add 3 or 4 frames. There are special cases for those, especially with stylized animation. But in general, it's 1 or 2 frames. That's the general rule of thumb. If it's a small eye dart, like just a small move, 1 frame. 2 frames is going to be too much. So, let's see. Going back here. So yeah, composition, beautiful work on this shot. And they're changing that focus, but overall, in this sequence, using that center line to indicate who is the most important and what we should be focused on. The police officer, then you split it here, have her fade off into the back as he then becomes the center focus. Okay. So beautiful composition here. I love it. Now there's another scene here that I also really love for another reason. Now, I will say this next scene, there's a little bit of a spoiler warning in here. So if you haven't seen this, it's not huge. It's not a big spoiler. It's not going to ruin the story. But if you'd rather not have any spoilers whatsoever, just be aware. This kind of is part of, it's telling a little bit more of the story than you typically see in the trailers. So just be aware of that. Where can I see this movie? I'm in Canada, so it's different than other countries. I think it's a DreamWorks film, so I think Netflix has it in the States typically. It's hard to say. If you just Google The Bad Guys, you'll probably find out where it's streaming for you. We don't have it? Oh, dang it. Yeah, so I would just look up The Bad Guys and see where it's streaming and see if you can find it somewhere. It's a great film. I love this film. It's probably one of my favorites. It's taken a top spot for sure. Okay. So, streaming to Peacock. Okay, yeah, that's what it was. It was Peacock. I always forget about Peacock. Is of all the different streaming things like Hulu, Netflix, Disney Plus, all those, I forget Peacock is a thing until something's actually on it. Also, hello, Daniel. You can still watch it in theaters. Nice. I do need to watch Lightyear. Lightyear is awesome. Okay, so let's see. How much time do I have? Okay, we can show both of these next 2 clips here. So once again, a little bit of a spoiler warning. Not huge spoilers, but just something to be aware of. So this next clip here, let's play through it. And I'm going to turn off the framing just so we can focus on it on its own. And then we'll bring the framing in afterwards. So bring in the sound. Let's mute the music here. And jump in. Oh, and let's refresh because it didn't want to load there. Okay, let it go for just a second. And then hit play.
It's the bad guys! Arrest them!
I love this.
They stole the golden dolphin!
Come on, you can't prove that. My baby!
I love that. The animation is amazing.
Never! We're out of here! So long, suckers!
This show is amazing.
Well, this just got a little weird.
The animation is so good. Okay, so we're going to look at it one more time. And then we're going to look at it with the framing, and then we'll dive into what's working. So let's jump in here.
It's the bad guy.
Nice center framing. You've got all the characters kind of framed right in the center for all the
Come on, you
important
can't prove
moves.
that. My baby.
On your knees, bad guys, with your hands up.
Never. We're out of here.
See where the grapple hook hit? Hey, and Blaze, thank you so much for the sub.
Well, this just got a
Or the
little
gift.
weird.
Thank you so much. Oh, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's mute that again and bring back our music. Okay, so if you look at this, there's a lot of center focus in here, especially when it comes to the main characters. The reason being, there's a lot of characters in here. You've got crowds, big crowds right here. You've got huge crowds of police officers here, which it's so much fun just to look at every single one of their expressions and see what they did. Like every one of them. Look at this one. I love that one. They're all so unique. But you've got all, I just noticed his expression. You've got all of these characters, and it could be very easy to lose track of what you're supposed to be looking at in any of these moments. So what they're doing is that they're using the center framing a lot. You've got these two characters within this center here. As they react, he falls pretty much directly into the center because he's the one that's kind of doing things, and he pulls her in closer. From there, we have her come in right in that center. You can see right where her eyes land. Boop, right there, right at that third line, right above it. And you've got a nice symmetrical pose right through there, but her body still falls within those thirds. And even her head tends to fall within this kind of these two upper thirds there. So this gives a nice composition. So we still see a little bit of the body underneath here in that lower third. Now, as they come up here, all the police officers, I love this guy. The poses are so good. At this point, it's just this nice dynamic angle. We've got this diagonal right here. This creates a sense of motion compared to just having it flat on. And at this point, it's just throwing things on screen. This composition here, I would say, is a little bit more using the golden ratio. So I'm going to see if I can draw this here. Golden ratio, kind of imagine that. It's terrible here. Imagine that a nice spiral there. You'll see that you have this big open space right here. And as you come in, you get more and more detail until right here, you get the railings, the pillars, all the cops, everything right in here, very tight compared to over here. So this is using a little bit more of the golden ratio framing right through here. Now, as they come through here, we've got the bad guys, and specifically the focus is on Wolf, and look at where he stays, right within this third right there. And when the camera stops moving, he's switched from one side here to the other right there. This creates a nice dynamic feeling that we spun around and he hasn't just been pinned in place. Just one thing I wanted to point out. Look at the cops, how none of them fall below the third line. And compositionally, they all go up into the center of the upper third. It creates this nice arc right there and brings all of our focus right into here. Shark right on that third line. Snake just off. And you can actually see, if you look at the center of Shark's head to the center of Snake's head, they're about the same distance away from the third. And then as they turn, Wolf is right in the center because that's who we should be looking at. He's the focus. Snake and Shark are about equidistant. What does that do? It makes it so that our focus isn't pulled one side more than the other. It's kind of keeping everything so that our focus stays here, right in that center. And if you look at the height of both of these characters, it creates a diagonal that goes right towards Wolf. Wow, I forgot his name for a second there. That's sad. And even if you look at Piranha and create a triangle there, it keeps Wolf right in that center of the triangle. Okay, now you cut back here. Once again, huge crowd, but very few of them fall below the third line. Just this guy right here, and this one right at the edge of the screen. But with this one, they filled the screen from top to bottom. There's no empty space like there is here. This creates a more oppressive feeling. It's just this wall of people that are blocking off their exit. But even amongst this, watch how they're framing up the police chief here. On the third, we're right there with the face. As she comes in, right to the center, right there, or close to. Still favoring the screen left, so that way the characters aren't just center, 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 center. We get this here before pushing right close to the center there, still favoring a little screen left. And then we have him screen right. So it creates that back and forth. One character's owning screen left, one's owning screen right, but they're very close together. As we go through here, once again, we have that nice center focus, beautiful line of action just in everything. Now, right here, we have the golden dolphin fall out and everyone looks at this. And this is a very important moment where we as the audience need to focus on this. How do they make it work? Why does it work? Because it's nowhere near a third. It's kind of in the like lower third right there. Why is it that we can spot it and focus on it? Well, there's a few different things. One, there is no motion happening here. Aside from Wolf talking, everything is still. So when it moves, it's the only thing that moves. Our eyes automatically go whoop right to that. Once it stops, I just noticed, I love this little 2D effect right there. That's really cool. Once it stops, watch what everyone's eye line is doing. Everyone's eye line leads right to it. Even all the cops. Everything, I can't draw to save my life to hit one point, but everyone is focused on that one area. I just realized he's lying down on his stomach. So all of our focus is pointed there because anywhere we look, our attention gets pulled to that point. Then we get this nice motion. I love how Wolf just slowly starts to tip. It's so unrealistic because at this point he should have fallen already. But then he just slowly tips and then gets pushed back into position, into the center of the frame. So good. But once again, center framing. And here, now the dolphin is right there on that center line there. But it's not really the focus. It's mostly Wolf and the group here. And one thing I love is how it creates this arc between all of them. They're not just positioned in a straight line. It just makes it more dynamic and interesting. Once again, slightly screen left. And as she comes through, right here, the hand hits the third mark. That's a great expression there. Really pushing the expressions. Now, as we go through here, once again, center focused, he jumps out. This helps bring our focus to him because everyone else is within the center area here. So when we see someone break out of that, it stands out. I love his little arms too. So it just swings across right there. Then when they reposition, now if you look at Shark and Snake, once again, they've evened out. They've kind of gone the same amount of distance away from center frame, and this allows Wolf to stand back out as the main focus. He fires the thing. Also, just keep in mind like where the center is, right there and there. His head is just slightly above center. So is the grappling. Now he hits, look at this, right along that center line. And then when it refocuses, right in the center. Right there. Not perfect, like you can see right there. It's slightly above, but it's still nice and focused. Everything is happening within this range here. This makes it very easy to not lose track of anything that's going on amongst all of this chaos. Now, as we go through here, once again, he comes in close. Hits that button there, and everything that's important is happening within that center. Makes it easy to see, easy to not lose track. And then right here, look at where the spool is. It's right there on that third. Everyone's is crammed into this segment here, except for Spider that's right on the edge. And then you get that, which is really a cool effect because it's really just, it's not tearing in any way. It's just a separate piece of geometry that's moving up. And you can see it right there, especially on the pants. Like, it's not cut or torn. It's just a visual trick, but at speed, it works beautifully. And I love the motion of his hips as they get pulled up and then just settle back down. Look at that, right on that center line right there. Everything is just beautiful in its composition. And then right there, once again, everything focuses right on him, right along that center. So when you have a very complex scene, tons of things happening all at the same time, keeping that center focus can help a lot, or trying to keep it symmetrical in certain ways. And this is something that if you take a look at Mad Max Fury Road, they do a lot. They keep most of the action happening right around that center frame. And this makes it very easy to watch these chaotic motions without losing track of anything that's important. And there's a video on YouTube that I would highly recommend checking out. I forget the name of it, but if you just go to YouTube and search Mad Max Fury Road center framing, it should be the first thing that comes up. Or Mad Max Fury Road composition. So there's a lot that you can do by keeping that kind of in mind right there. Now, with that, there's one last shot that I want to focus on, and unfortunately I am running out of time. Normally I like to stream for about 3 hours, but this week, unfortunately, with work, I'm not going to have a huge amount of time. So we're going to take a look at this, and then I'll probably have to call it here. But in this shot, what I want to focus on is something that I mentioned at the beginning when we first started talking about all of this composition stuff, is how every character has their screen left, screen right space. And what we want to do is use that to tell a story of how they interact with each other. And if a character starts to push into another person's space, it shows that they are in control, or that they are being, like, they're powerful and squeezing the other person out, or maybe they're just being inconsiderate and rude. And if you look at this, keep that in mind between the two characters here and their relationship with each other. So let's hit play here. I'll stop the music and just pay attention to that composition
Like to putting you in jail.
and that center line.
Without you, who am I? I'm just kidding. This is the best moment of my life!
It's the end of the bad guys. Like to putting you in jail.
Okay, so beautiful shot. You can see everything is kind of that center frame again, center third. But if we actually bring this in here, you'll notice that Wolf is actually favoring the third line right here. Whereas she is favoring more towards the center line. She is in control of the situation. And as we watch this here,
Life to putting you in jail.
look how
You
much
are my
she
darkest
favors
sin.
and pushes
Without you, who
into
am I?
his side.
I'm just kidding. This is the best
Especially
moment of
there.
my life.
It's the end of the bad guys.
She is continually pushing into his space. Especially right there. She has moved entirely into his space and is just like manhandling him. So not only do you have that left-right composition, but you have her towering over top of him. She's on that upper third. He's down here on the lower third. And it just really shows how much he is not in control right now. So as you're thinking of your compositions, once again, think of that relationship between the two characters. If this shot, as they're walking down the stairs, was handled in a way where she is over here and he is over here, sure, that could work, but it makes it even. They're both kind of equals in terms of screen space. Sure, she might be a little higher, which might make her feel a little bit more powerful based on body language and all of that. But in general, they would feel kind of like equals. But by having her more towards the center and him being pushed more towards the third, it makes him feel defeated. He doesn't have a master plan. He's not going to like sneak out of this. She is in control of this situation. So by doing this, you just manage to tell this extra story on top of everything. And it's something that I personally love to look for in films, is how do they treat those compositions and how the characters relate to one another on screen. And look at her, like right in that center, whereas he favors that third. Right in the center here. She pulls away, but if you look at her body, it's still favoring that center line. And look at those beautiful mouth shapes. It's so exaggerated. That mouth shape makes me think of the butler from Cats Don't Dance. Look at those teeth. Once again, she's pushing into his space. So just a great use of the composition here, right back into the center. It's beautiful. I love it. I could talk more about all the individual elements, but at this point, it's just kind of repeating the same thing. How their eyes kind of line up towards the top third or the center third. Everything's kind of within those ranges. Now, once again, keep in mind that these are not absolutes. You don't have to hit like right at this point here. That's not the goal, because if you do, it's not going to look right. But as long as you're kind of aiming towards and you're using it to tell a story, you can get some really appealing and really dynamic shots out of that. Now, I just wanted to mention here, like she's slapping him from behind, but they're cheating the shot. If you look at her arm is way too low. She'd be smacking him in the back of his knees, not his back or his butt or anything like that. But it works. In animation, you don't have to have things like perfect all the time. As long as it reads clearly, that's the important thing. And honestly, in live action as well. Like if you think of characters punching each other, in live action films, very rarely do they actually hit each other. It's all just faked to camera. So as long as you can do something in animation and fake it to camera and it feels good, that's okay. You don't have to try and make things actually work anatomically and in real screen space. So just something to keep in mind. It doesn't mean that we should always be cheating and not think of real life physics and just kind of throw them out the window. but don't feel tied to them, especially animation. We can exaggerate things so much. I love her mouth shapes. The facial expressions in this show are amazing. So let's see, there's a question here. Does this mean they work the animations having all the time the grid on so they don't lose the idea of composition? No, not necessarily. Most animators that I know don't usually use the grid too much. It's mostly just kind of getting used to where those thirds are. So you don't have to turn on a grid as long as you know approximately where they are on screen. Now in Maya, you can use the framing button in the viewports to turn on a grid that you could use to kind of have a built-in idea of where these points are. So you can do that, and I'll do that occasionally if I really want to hit something specific, or especially with a center frame, really make sure I hit the center. But in general, as long as you kind of just get approximately close, you're good. And if you want, you can just have some images like I have here and just bring them in as an image plane and just overlay it over top of your shot and get an idea of where your thirds are going to be or where your center frame is going to be, anything like that. Let's see. So when animating such scenes with multiple characters, are both characters animated by the same animator, or are the characters assigned to different animators? It depends on the shot. Most of the time in CG films, you will animate both characters, mostly because it's kind of a pain to have a shot sent to one person to animate one character and then sent to another person to animate another character. It's just tedious more than anything, because you have to work on the same file, or you have to reference in the animations, and if they have to look at each other, it just makes it hard to get a clean composition. If they are interacting with each other like this, most definitely you're animating it all as one animator, because that would be a nightmare trying to get that to happen between two animators. Now with 2D, that's a little different. In 2D, if your characters are doing some heavy interactions, that's going to be animated with one animator because it's going to be much easier to do with full control. But if the characters are separate, at least in the old days, I'm not sure if they do it so much now, it would be animated by two animators potentially, because each animator would have, or you would have character animators who were focused on animating a specific character. You had animators whose job it was to animate one character and focus almost entirely on one character. You don't have that so much nowadays. Nowadays, animators will be animating any number of characters because we don't have to worry about staying on model and learning how to draw the characters and keep them consistent. In the old days, when you're doing 2D animation, you have to learn how to draw one character and make sure that that character stays the same throughout the whole film. And if you've got 20 animators all animating that same character and then also animating every other character, that means every animator has to learn how to draw that character and keep them consistent. That's a lot of work. CG doesn't have that. And nowadays with 2D and actually having 2D rigs, that's much less of an issue as well. So in CG, you usually animate both characters, or if you have 3 characters, 4 characters, you'll animate them all together. The main thing that you're not going to animate is the crowds. So the crowds will be handled by someone else or a few other people. So as a character animator, if I was hired on this shot, for example, I would be animating this, or if I was starting out as a crowd animator, I might be animating the whole crowd or portions of the crowd right there. So yeah, I love this shot. I love the character interaction, and again, the way they're using that composition to really show how the dynamics of the characters are changing throughout the film, especially when we compare it back to this shot where Wolf is the one that kind of takes control of the scene here. So we have kind of the opposite situation. Very different situation, but we still have a character taking over the scene. Make sure I close this so we actually get the proper framing. There we go. So yeah, this is something I would highly recommend all of you do, if you're interested in learning cinematography and getting better at positioning your own cameras, look at the rule of thirds and the center line and use that as kind of a guide. Not every film uses it. Some films use the rule of fifths. So you're actually splitting in fives. That's very rare. Usually you see this in shows that have really, really wide screens like Cinescope. One film that uses that in certain areas is 2001: A Space Odyssey, as well as Lawrence of Arabia, I believe. But you have the rule of thirds, you have the center line, you've got all sorts of different composition rules. But as a base, just getting a solid understanding of the rule of thirds is going to get you a lot of the way there. How much time does it take to animate shots like these? It depends. Like at this quality, it's hard to say. The animators might have had a few weeks to animate this, maybe a month, depending on how much they're doing and how much they're shaping things, maybe even longer. I highly doubt it's longer than a month, honestly, but probably like a week or two, something like that, especially for the level of polish that they're getting in. But depending on a production, you might have a shot that's the exact same length and the amount of characters and everything is the same, but you might only have 3 or 4 days to animate on it. You're definitely not going to be able to get the amount of polish in there. So it depends on how high the polish level is, what the studio is, how crunched they are, a lot of factors, but probably a couple of weeks, I would guess. It's hard to say, honestly. You also have some animators who are just crazy fast and can push out shots like in a few days, and it's like, what the heck? How do you do that? So yeah. Let's see. I think those are the main notes that I would have on these. Once again, like I could dive more into this and we could like go over all sorts of little animation bits and all sorts of other like compositional, like pointing things out on where things are landing and how they're framing things up, how are they moving from one to the other. But at this point, it's just kind of more of the same. And at this point, I would honestly recommend all of you just take your favorite clips, whether it's from an animated film, whether it's live action, and just kind of do this. Just look at the composition and see how they are framing things up. Are they using high angles, low angles, eye level angles? Where are things falling on the thirds or the center lines? And start to build that mental library of compositional tricks that make a shot feel dynamic and interesting, and then that you can apply into your own shots when you're doing something similar, where you're doing a shot that maybe you want a character to feel imposing or that they're dominating the screen. You can use these types of elements.